Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sleepy Shadows. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and fall asleep. If today was long or heavy, I'll do my best to make your night a little more comfortable with these stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy calm, quiet horror stories like these, you're welcome to subscribe. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. I was in a car chase, and even now, years later, my hands get a little shaky when I think about it. At the time, I didn't fully understand how close we might have been to something going very, very wrong. Back then, it just felt unreal, like one long rush of adrenaline mixed with disbelief and fear that I didn't really process until much later. To understand why the situation escalated so fast, you have to understand where I grew up. I'm from an area where small, quiet towns are scattered in between massive inner-city neighborhoods. On paper, it looks harmless. In reality, when I was in high school, gang violence was so bad that the National Guard had to come in and support the local police. That wasn't some rumor or exaggeration. It was real, and it shaped how people acted, especially at night. And the other problem was that if you wanted to do anything remotely fun, you usually had to go into areas that weren't safe. Movie theaters, bowling alleys, arcades, places teenagers wanted to go were often built right on the edge of rough neighborhoods. You didn't think twice about it at the time because it was normal. You just learned to keep your head down and hope nothing happened. This was around the time the Rocky reboot had just been released. I don't even remember which one exactly, just that it was a big deal, and everyone wanted to see it. Me and two of my friends decided to drive out to the theater together. I was driving. With me were my best friend John and our friend Jack. John was the kind of guy who barely spoke unless he had something important to say. He was built like a tank, a linebacker, captain of the football team, and one of the calmest people I've ever known. Nothing rattled him. If a situation went bad, he was the guy you wanted next to you. Jack was the opposite. Jack talked non-stop. He loved jokes, loved attention, loved pushing buttons. He wasn't malicious, just reckless. At the time, he played baseball seriously, and later on he became a semi-professional pitcher. That detail matters more than you'd think. The movie ended, and we walked back out to the parking lot feeling relaxed, joking around, replaying scenes from the film. That relaxed feeling vanished almost immediately when we noticed a car parked not far from ours. It had been completely destroyed. I don't mean scratched or dented. I mean trashed. Windows shattered, dents all over the body, dirt shoveled into the driver's seat. A trash can had been dumped upside down onto the roof, and the tires were slashed flat. Sitting on top of the roof, perfectly upright, was a massive 7-Eleven Big Gulp cup. Someone had been furious. This wasn't random vandalism. This was personal. Jack stopped and stared at it for a second too long. Then he said the words I wish he had never said. He held up a rock he'd picked up from the ground and said, half joking, half serious, "Think I can hit that cup off?" Me and John immediately told him no. Not a chance. We told him to drop the rock and get in the car. This was not the place or the time for Jack to test his throwing arm. We started walking toward my car, assuming he would follow. Then everything went sideways. As me and John were getting into the car, Jack came sprinting toward us, his face completely different from before. Gone was the grin. Gone was the confidence. Or he yanked open the back door and yelled, "We need to go, now!" That's when we heard shouting coming from the direction of the theater entrance. Angry voices, loud voices, more than one. Jack had thrown the rock. We don't even know if he hit the cup. but the timing couldn't have been worse. The owner of that destroyed car had come out right then. In that neighborhood, being accused of something didn't require proof. Perception was enough. And 3 teenagers standing near a trashed car was not a good look. I didn't wait for an explanation. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. Jack was laughing at first, trying to play it off. He kept saying there was no way that guy could follow us because his car was destroyed. What none of us had considered was that the owner of the car wasn't alone. About 5 minutes down the road, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. High beams, flashing, aggressive. My stomach dropped. I turned down a side road next to a gas station, hoping maybe it was just someone impatient. Instead, the car behind us cut through the gas station lot and came out in front of us, blocking the road. Another car pulled up behind us. Doors opened. Time slowed down in a way I had never experienced before. I honestly thought we were about to die. My brain jumped straight to the worst possible outcome. Guns, knives, beatings. I couldn't hear my friends clearly anymore. They were yelling something about how me and John could fight, how Jack could help. That meant nothing to me. Muscles don't stop bullets. I saw a flash of silver near the driver's hand of the car in front of us. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was a phone. But in that moment, it might as well have been a gun. Pure adrenaline took over. I slammed my foot on the gas, swerved around the front car, and cut back through the gas station. I blew through a red light without even slowing down. That was the moment it became a full-on chase. Jack started frantically calling people, trying to see if we could pull up to a party or a house and outnumber them. John, meanwhile, calmly took off his jewelry, wrapped it up, and put his wallet, phone, and keys in my glove box. He wrapped his chain around his fist and told me, in the calmest voice imaginable, that we should just pull over. I thought he was insane. I debated driving straight to a police station or intentionally getting pulled over. My mind was racing through options that all felt terrible. We caught a green light, and the cars chasing us got stuck at a red behind traffic. I took the opportunity to turn onto a larger road and floored it. I hit 95 miles per hour and stayed there. After a few minutes, Jack said he couldn't see them anymore. I slowed down, stupidly relieved. There was no exit in sight, and just as quickly as the relief came, it vanished. Jack yelled that they were back. 2 cars, gaining fast. I did something strange then. I don't know why. I just acted normal. I drove like nothing was happening. The first car passed us, slowed down, and for a brief moment didn't seem to recognize us. That tiny hesitation was all I needed. At the very last second, I swerved hard and took the exit. The car in front kept going, completely fooled. Now there was only 1 car behind us. We were back in familiar territory, but flying down dark back roads with no streetlights. These guys were clearly out of their element. At that point, we realized something important. If they had guns, they would have used them already. That realization didn't make things safe, but it made them slightly less hopeless. I pulled off near a cornfield and stopped the car. My heart was pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. John got out first. Jack followed. I stepped out last. We started walking toward the other car, which was still about 100 feet away. Then Jack did something completely insane. He started waving. Not at the car, at the cornfield behind us. He was gesturing wildly, pointing, waving, acting like there were people hiding out there. I realized what he was doing a second too late. He was bluffing, making it look like we had backup, making it look like this was an ambush. I have no idea why it worked. It shouldn't have. But the car hesitated. Then it went into reverse. Then it sped away into the darkness. We stood there in silence for a long time, shaking, laughing, breathing, trying to process what had just happened. Jack was still an idiot. But that night, his stupidity might have saved our lives. I grew up in a very small town in Ohio, right in Amish country. If you've never lived somewhere like that, it's hard to explain just how quiet and empty things can feel, especially when you're a teenager with way too much energy and nowhere to put it. There weren't malls to hang out at, no clubs, no real nightlife. After a certain hour, the streets were dead. So, like most bored high school kids, we found our own ways to entertain ourselves, and most of those ways involved going places we probably shouldn't have gone. We were always looking for off-the-path spots. Old barns, forgotten bridges, wooded areas, abandoned houses. Anything that felt secret or forbidden automatically became interesting. One night, a group of us got together at my buddy's house and watched the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Not the newer remake, but the old one, grainy and disturbing in a way that sticks with you. At the time, we thought it was hilarious to scare ourselves like that. We were laughing, talking trash, daring each other to do stupid things. That's when my buddy mentioned an abandoned house he knew about deep in the woods. He said it was old, massive, and creepy as hell. Someone joked that we should go there right after the movie, and instead of anyone being the voice of reason, everyone immediately agreed. Fear didn't feel real yet. It felt like part of the fun. There were about 10 of us total, a mix of guys and girls. We grabbed flashlights, extra batteries, and whatever jackets we could find. I brought my shotgun. At the time, I honestly thought it was just for laughs, something to make the whole thing feel more intense. Looking back now, I realize how insane that sounds. But back then, it felt normal. Guns were common where we lived, and I never imagined I'd actually need it. To get to the house, we had to park on a gravel road in the middle of nowhere. No street lights, no nearby houses, nothing but trees and darkness. From there, we crossed a shallow river, hopping over slick rocks, laughing and shoving each other so nobody fell in. After that, it was about a mile walk through dense woods. The path wasn't really a path at all, just something worn down from animals and the occasional human who knew where they were going. As we walked deeper into the woods, the mood started to change. The jokes got quieter. Flashlights bounced nervously from tree to tree. Every snapped twig sounded louder than it should have. You could tell some of the girls were already regretting the decision, but nobody wanted to be the first one to say we should turn back. Eventually, through the trees, we saw it. The house. It was a massive, turn-of-the-century mansion, the kind of place that must have been beautiful once. Now it looked like it had been forgotten for decades. There was no driveway, no sign of recent use. Nature had slowly been reclaiming it. Vines climbed the walls, windows were broken or boarded, and parts of the roof had collapsed inward. Even from the outside, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong there anymore. We tried to go inside, but it quickly became obvious that wasn't possible. The second floor had collapsed onto the first, creating a tangled mess of beams, flooring, and debris. One wrong step, and you'd fall straight through. So instead, we walked around the outside, shining our flashlights along the walls, peering into windows, pointing out creepy details. That's when one of my friends noticed writing on the side of the house. At first, it just looked like random scratches or graffiti. But when we moved closer and shined multiple flashlights on it, we realized it wasn't random at all. It was words, sentences. And at the end of the writing were 10 sets of initials. Each one matched someone in our group. I still get chills thinking about that moment. We all went silent. Someone nervously laughed, saying it had to be a coincidence. But the chances of that were basically zero. The girls completely freaked out. A couple of them started crying, saying they wanted to leave immediately. The movie, The darkness, the house, and now this. It was all too much. We agreed to leave. There's no arguments. As we turned to walk away, someone yelled from the other side of the house, "Hey, I found something!" That sentence changed everything. We all ran over to where he was standing. He was looking into a first-floor window, frozen in place. He slowly raised his flashlight and shined it inside. Hanging from the ceiling was a white wedding dress. It was tied to a rope, swaying slightly in the stale air. Across the front of the dress was a massive dark stain that looked exactly like dried blood. Not a small mark, not a splash. A huge, ugly stain that covered most of it. Nobody said a word. It felt like our bodies all reacted at once. We backed away from the window instinctively, like touching it would infect us with whatever horror was inside. I took 2 steps back. Then the ground gave out beneath me. There was a loud, sickening crash, followed by screaming. In a split second, 6 of us fell straight through the ground. We dropped about 10 feet down into darkness. I hit the dirt hard, knocking the air out of my lungs. Someone landed on top of someone else. People were yelling, panicking, trying to get their bearings. When I got my flashlight back on, I realized we weren't in a basement. The walls were dirt. The floor was dirt. It felt more like a dugout room beneath the house, hidden and forgotten. And it looked like something straight out of Texas Chainsaw Massacre. There were ropes hanging from the walls, chains, rusty hooks, old saws, tools laid out neatly on tables like someone had taken pride in organizing them. Nothing was random. That was the worst part. It wasn't junk thrown together. It was deliberate. I didn't even have time to fully process what I was seeing before someone above us started screaming for us to get out. Hands reached down through the hole, grabbing arms, pulling people up one by one. Adrenaline took over. Nobody argued. Nobody hesitated. We got everyone out except one guy who had landed wrong and seriously messed up his ankle. He couldn't put weight on it. 2 guys practically carried him as we started back through the woods. We stayed in a tight group, moving fast but trying not to panic. I walked at the back of the group, holding my shotgun, walking backward the entire time. The safety was off. I had never felt more alert in my life. Every shadow looked like a person. Every sound felt like footsteps following us. I was fully prepared to shoot anything that came out of the trees, and that thought alone terrified me. As we made it back to the cars without seeing anyone, but none of us spoke much on the drive home. The fear didn't fade right away. It clung to us. The next day, a few of us decided to go back in daylight. We needed to see it again, to convince ourselves it was real. As we pulled onto the gravel road, we saw 3 cop cars parked along the side. We pulled up and asked what was going on. Apparently, someone had heard us the night before and called the cops. When the police went into the woods and investigated the house, they discovered it had been used as a meth lab and a murder scene. That hidden room under the house wasn't a prank or some haunted attraction. It was real. People had done horrible things there. I never heard much more after that. I don't think they ever caught the people responsible. What still messes with me is thinking about how close we were to something much worse. If we had gone on a different night, if the wrong people had been there, there's a real chance none of us would have made it out. Sometimes boredom feels harmless. Sometimes it almost gets you killed. A few years ago, something started happening in our house that slowly wore both of us down. It didn't arrive all at once, and it didn't feel dramatic in the beginning. It crept in quietly, night after night, until it became part of our routine in the worst possible way. My wife began having night terrors. At first, it sounded like the kind of thing you hear about and shrug off. Bad dreams, stress, a brain misfiring while half asleep. She has never been someone who believes in anything paranormal, spiritual or supernatural. She's practical, logical, grounded. If something strange happens, her instinct is always to look for a normal explanation. So when she first told me about it, she laughed it off, even though her hands were shaking. She said she kept waking up in the middle of the night and seeing something standing over her in bed. Not a face, not a person, a shape. She described it as a black ooze or blob, something without sharp edges, like a spill of darkness that had vaguely taken on a human outline. It didn't walk. It didn't speak. It just stood there, looming over her, close enough that she could feel it. And every time she saw it, sheer panic would rip through her body. She would scream, gasp, thrash, or bolt upright, and only after a few seconds would the shape sort of dissolve, like smoke breaking apart and vanishing. This didn't happen once or twice. It happened every single night, sometimes multiple times in the same night. She stopped sleeping properly. I stopped sleeping properly. I would wake up to her screaming or shaking, my heart instantly pounding, adrenaline flooding my body before my mind even caught up. I'd turn on the light, hold her, would talk to her, reassure her that nothing was there, that she was safe. She'd calm down eventually, but the damage was already done. The rest of the night was restless and shallow. Weeks turned into months. She grew exhausted, emotionally and physically. Dark circles under her eyes, short temper, anxiety that crept into her days. She tried everything, changing sleep schedules, cutting caffeine, meditating, seeing a doctor. The doctor suggested stress, maybe anxiety, maybe a form of sleep paralysis mixed with night terrors. That explanation made sense on paper, but it didn't make the nights any easier. I'll be honest, I'm not brave when it comes to fear. I hate the dark. Always have. Horror movies mess me up badly. When I saw The Ring years ago, I couldn't sleep properly for days. My imagination runs wild, and once it gets going, it doesn't stop. I'm the kind of person who checks behind the shower curtain, even though I know nothing is there. So every night, when my wife would wake up terrified, part of me was scared too. Not just for her, but of the idea that something unknown might be sharing our space. I never told her that part. I didn't want to make things worse. But after several months, something shifted inside me. Watching someone you love suffer night after night does something to you. The fear gets replaced by frustration. Then frustration turns into anger. Not angry at her, never that. Angry at whatever was causing this. Angry at the helplessness. Angry at the way our home, the place that should have been safest, felt invaded. One night, after another particularly bad episode, I made a decision. I told her we should switch sides of the bed. She looked at me strangely and asked why. I told her I just wanted to try something different, maybe trick her brain, break the pattern. She didn't argue. At that point, she would have tried anything. We went to bed. I lay there in the dark, listening to her breathing slowly even out as she fell asleep. My own heart was pounding harder than usual. I was scared, but underneath that fear was something else. Determination. A quiet, simmering rage. I closed my eyes and started repeating a thought in my head. Over and over. "Bring it, you son of a bitch!" I didn't say it out loud. I didn't even really think of it as words at first. It was more like a mental broadcast, a challenge. I kept repeating it, almost daring whatever this thing was to show itself to me instead of her. My fear didn't disappear, but it took a back seat. Protectiveness took over. Eventually, I fell asleep. When I woke up, it wasn't slow or gentle. I snapped awake out of a deep sleep like someone had flipped a switch, and it was there. Something was standing directly over me. It wasn't solid, but it wasn't imaginary either. It had no clear edges, no face. No eyes. Just a dark, blobby shape that vaguely resembled a human form, like someone had poured black ink into the air and let it hang there. It didn't move, but it felt present in a way I can't fully explain. What hit me first wasn't fear. It was this overwhelming sense of wrongness, a deep, sickening feeling that wasn't physical. It was emotional, like a cold, hollow disconnect. Like something that didn't belong anywhere near human life was too close for comfort. My chest felt tight, not from panic, but from something heavier. Anger, protective instinct, adrenaline. I didn't scream. I didn't freeze. Something in me snapped. I was still half asleep, and the way my thoughts worked in that moment wasn't logical or structured. It was raw, instinctive. I didn't speak with words. I lashed out mentally, the same way you'd shove someone away from a loved one without thinking. I sent it a message, not as a sentence, but as a feeling. Get out of my house. Stay away from my wife. If you don't, I will end you. The intensity of that moment surprised even me. It felt justified, righteous. Months of watching my wife suffer poured into that single instant. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was furious. And then the shape began to fade. It didn't explode or vanish suddenly. It thinned, like smoke dispersing in the air, until there was nothing there at all. No sound, no movement. Just absence. I was fully awake now. My heart was racing, but I didn't feel panic. I felt strangely calm, alert but steady. I turned my head slightly to check on my wife. She was asleep, peacefully. No signs of distress. I lay there for a while, listening to the quiet of the room, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing did. Eventually, I fell back asleep. The next morning, my wife woke up confused. She said she hadn't had a night terror. I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to influence her, didn't want to plant ideas. We went about our day. That night, she slept through again. And the next. And the next. It's been about 2 years now. She has never had another night terror. We've talked about it since, cautiously, with skepticism and curiosity. We both acknowledge that there are logical explanations. Sleep paralysis, shared stress, the power of the mind. I don't claim to have chased off a demon or proven anything supernatural. But I can't ignore the timing. I can't ignore the feeling. Whatever that experience was, it ended something that had been tormenting my wife for months. And that alone is enough to make me pause whenever I think about it. It doesn't terrify me anymore. It just raises an eyebrow. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, I'd appreciate it if you subscribe to Sleepy Shadows for daily calm horror stories made for late nights and sleep. You can also turn on notifications so you don't miss a new story when the night gets quiet and the shadows return. Now, let's continue. When I think back to my childhood, there are a lot of memories that feel warm and normal. But there are also memories tied to the house I grew up in that still make my stomach tighten. That house never felt right to me, even when I was very young and didn't have the words to explain why. There were many strange moments there, moments I tried to forget or explain away. But one incident stands out more than all the others. Even now, years later, it still feels vivid, like it happened last night instead of decades ago. I was about 10 years old at the time. I was a small kid, nervous by nature and extremely afraid of the dark. My bedroom was upstairs, tucked away from the rest of the house, and at night it felt completely isolated. Once the lights were turned off, the darkness felt heavy, like it pressed down on me. I used to lie completely still, eyes tightly shut, convincing myself that if I didn't look, nothing bad could happen. Opening my eyes in the dark felt dangerous, like inviting something in. We had a very large dog named Ringo. He was massive, easily my size or bigger, with a thick body and heavy paws. He was gentle and calm, and he loved sleeping in my bed. My bed was only a twin, so when Ringo climbed in, there wasn't much room left for me. His weight was comforting. I could feel his warmth, hear his breathing, and know that I wasn't alone. On nights when the house felt especially unsettling, having him there was the only reason I could fall asleep at all. That night started like so many others. I was already in bed, under the covers, trying to drift off. The lights had been turned off, and my room was completely dark. I was lying on my back, tense but exhausted, listening to the quiet sounds of the house settling. The walls creaked softly, the kind of normal noises older houses make, but in that place, even ordinary sounds felt suspicious. I was just on the edge of sleep when I heard my bedroom door open. It was a slow, familiar sound, the faint creak of the hinges as the door moved inward. My heart jumped, but I didn't panic right away. I assumed it was Ringo. He often pushed doors open with his nose when he wanted to come in. Without opening my eyes, I softly said his name. Ringo? My voice came out quiet and unsure, but I expected to hear the sound of his paws on the floor. Instead, a moment later, I felt the bed shift. The mattress dipped down near my legs, exactly the way it always did when Ringo climbed up. The weight was unmistakable. Heavy, solid, familiar. I felt pressure across my lower legs, like his body settling in, and my immediate fear melted into relief. I remember thinking, good, he's here, I'm safe. Still keeping my eyes shut, I reached my hand down toward the foot of the bed to pet him. I expected to feel coarse fur, the warmth of his body, maybe his tail thumping against the mattress. My hand touched nothing. I paused, confused, and reached again, moving my arm slowly through the space where his body should have been. There was still weight on my legs. The mattress was still pressed down. But there was no dog. My breathing became shallow. I sat up slightly, still stubbornly keeping my eyes closed, telling myself I was just missing him in the dark. I leaned forward and reached again, this time with both hands, carefully feeling around. Nothing, and the weight didn't move. It didn't shift or respond the way a living animal would. It was just there, pressing down, heavy and wrong. Something inside me broke through my fear of the dark. I opened my eyes. There was nothing on my bed. No dog, no shape, no movement. Just empty space and the unmistakable indentation in the mattress where something heavy should have been. My blankets were slightly pushed down over my legs, as if something invisible was lying there. The terror that hit me was instant and overwhelming. My chest felt like it was going to explode. I screamed as loudly as I could, a raw, desperate scream that came from somewhere deep inside me. I don't even remember standing up or moving, just the sound of my own voice filling the room as I scrambled backward. The weight vanished the moment I screamed, but the mattress sprang back into place, like whatever had been there was suddenly gone. That almost made it worse. There was no slow release, no explanation. 1 second something was there, the next it wasn't. I kept screaming until I heard my mom running up the stairs. The hallway light came on, flooding my room with yellow light, and she rushed in, calling my name, asking what was wrong. I was shaking so badly I could barely speak. I pointed at the bed, sobbing, trying to explain through tears that something had been there, that I thought it was Ringo, that it wasn't. She checked the room, the closet, under the bed. She brought Ringo upstairs, who had been sleeping downstairs the entire time. He wagged his tail and looked confused, completely calm and normal. Seeing him there only confirmed what I already knew. He hadn't been in my room. I don't remember much of what happened after that. I know I didn't sleep in my room that night. I think I stayed in my mom's bed, curled up and exhausted. I know she tried to comfort me, telling me it was probably a dream, that I must have imagined it while half asleep. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But I knew the difference between a dream and being awake. I knew what I felt. That was the first time I truly understood that something was wrong with that house. It wasn't just my imagination or fear of the dark. It wasn't just a kid being dramatic. Something in that place knew me. Something knew how to mimic comfort, how to feel familiar enough to lower my guard. That incident was far from the last strange thing that happened there. Over the years, there were other moments, sounds with no source, doors moving on their own, and the constant feeling of being watched when I was alone. But nothing ever matched the pure terror of that night. The moment I realized that even my safest comfort, my dog, could be copied. Even now, as an adult, I can't sleep with my legs uncovered. I still hate the feeling of weight on the bed if I don't know exactly what's causing it. And I still think about that house sometimes, wondering what else might have happened there before we lived in it, and why it seemed to focus so much attention on me. That was just one night, just one moment, but it changed how I saw the world. It was the first of many incidents in that house, and the one that taught me that fear doesn't always come with footsteps or shadows. Sometimes it comes quietly, pretending to be something you trust, waiting until you're brave enough to open your eyes. I was in middle school at the time, either 7th or 8th grade, and even now the memory of this night still makes my chest feel tight when I think about it. It wasn't dramatic in the way movies are dramatic. There were no shadows jumping out at us, no loud crashes or obvious danger. That's what makes it worse. It was quiet, confusing, and completely unexplained. And it happened at an age when you're old enough to understand fear, but young enough to feel totally powerless. My brother was 2 years younger than me, and that night we also had 2 friends over, both around our age. It was supposed to be a normal, fun night. Our parents had gone out to a dinner party, nothing unusual, somewhere about 10 or 15 minutes away. They had done this before, and we had stayed home alone a handful of times, but it was still something that made me a little nervous. I was the oldest, which meant I felt responsible, whether I wanted to or not. We spent most of the evening in the basement, which was basically our hangout area. There was a TV, a game console, a couch, and a bunch of old storage boxes pushed against the walls. The basement lights were bright enough, and as long as we were all together, it felt safe. We were playing video games, laughing, arguing about whose turn it was, completely distracted and having a good time. At some point, I realized our dog needed to go outside. Her name was Nugget. She wasn't a big dog, but she was very noticeable, always underfoot, always near someone. She followed me upstairs like she always did. The rest of the house was quiet, and the contrast between the noise in the basement and the stillness upstairs immediately made me feel more aware of everything around me. Our front door setup is important to explain because it's what made the situation so unsettling. We had double front doors. One door opened normally. The second one stayed shut unless you deliberately unlatched it at the bottom and the top, which required bending down, stretching up, and using a bit of force. It wasn't something that could accidentally open. On top of that, we always kept the doors locked. My parents drilled this into my head, especially when they were gone. Lock the doors. Always. I opened the main door, let Nugget out into the yard, closed the door behind her and locked it. I remember doing it clearly. I didn't rush, I didn't half-lock it. I turned the lock and even tugged the handle slightly, the way you do without thinking, just to make sure it was secure. I was absolutely certain it was locked. Then I went back downstairs. Everything felt normal again. We kept playing video games, completely absorbed. Time passed in that way it does when you're focused on something, where you don't really notice minutes slipping by. About 20 minutes later, maybe a little more, my friend Spencer suddenly said, "Hey, who let Nugget in?" His voice wasn't joking, it was confused. I looked up from the screen, annoyed at first, ready to say something like, "What are you talking about?" But then I saw her. Nugget was lying on the floor not far from us, calm and relaxed, like she had been inside the whole time. No mud, no dirt, no sign she had just come in from outside. For a second, nobody said anything. We all just stared at each other. My first thought was that maybe one of my friends was messing with me. Maybe someone had gone upstairs and let her in as a joke. But everyone immediately denied it. My brother swore he hadn't moved. The two friends looked genuinely confused, not amused. That's when a cold feeling settled in my stomach. I told everyone to stay downstairs and went back up alone. As I climbed the stairs, the house felt different. Too quiet. Every step sounded louder than it should have. I remember calling out for my parents, even though I already knew they weren't supposed to be home yet. I called their names anyway, hoping somehow they would answer, and everything would make sense. No response. I walked into the front hallway and my heart dropped. Both front doors were wide open, not cracked, not slightly ajar, wide open. The night air was coming in, cool and still. I could see outside clearly. The porch light was on, shining onto an empty driveway. For a moment, my brain refused to catch up with what my eyes were seeing. I just stood there, frozen, trying to understand how that was possible. I rushed forward and slammed the doors shut, my hands shaking, and locked them again. I checked the locks twice. Then I ran to the garage and looked out the window. My parents' car wasn't there. The house was still empty. That's when the fear really hit. I grabbed the phone and called my parents, my voice already shaking. I told them exactly what had happened, trying not to sound hysterical but failing anyway. I explained how I had let Nugget out, locked the door, gone back downstairs, and then found her inside with the doors wide open, where there was a pause on the other end of the line. Then my parents told me they were leaving immediately and coming home. As soon as I hung up, the adrenaline kicked in. I didn't know what else to do, so I grabbed the first thing that made me feel even slightly safer, which was a kitchen knife. I know now that it wouldn't have helped much, but at the time, holding it made me feel like I wasn't completely helpless. I ran back downstairs and told everyone what I had seen. The mood shifted instantly. All joking stopped. Nobody laughed or tried to downplay it. We all went into the small storage room in the basement and closed the door behind us. It was cramped and smelled like cardboard and dust, but it felt safer than being out in the open. We sat there in silence, listening. Every tiny noise made us jump. The house creaked like houses always do, but now every sound felt intentional, like someone moving upstairs. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I kept thinking about the doors, about how they had been opened. Not just unlocked, but opened completely. Someone would have had to stand there and do it. Someone would have had to let Nugget back inside. But there was no sign of anyone else in the house. When my parents finally came home, it felt like hours had passed, even though it probably wasn't that long. They checked the entire house, inside and out. Every room, every closet, the yard, the locks. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no explanation. They tried to calm us down, suggesting maybe I hadn't locked the door properly, or maybe Nugget had somehow pushed it open. Though even as they said it, it sounded weak. The second door especially made that explanation almost impossible. That night, none of us slept well. Even after my friends went home, I stayed awake, listening for sounds, replaying the moment in my head over and over. I knew what I had done. I knew I had locked that door. To this day, I don't know what happened. I don't know how my dog got back inside. I don't know how both doors ended up wide open. Nothing else like that ever happened again, which somehow makes it worse, not better. There was no pattern, no follow-up, no answer. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't something dramatic or supernatural that I could clearly label. It was just one moment where reality didn't line up with logic, and I was old enough to understand that something was very wrong. Even now, years later, whenever I lock a door, I always check it twice. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still think about Nugget lying calmly on the basement floor, like nothing strange had happened at all. This is one of those experiences that never really leaves you. It doesn't fade into something distant or hazy with time. Even now, almost 8 years later, I can still feel the fear in my chest when I think about it. Like my body remembers before my brain even has a chance to rationalize it. I still don't know what was really happening in that place, and that uncertainty is probably the worst part of all. I was 20 years old at the time, and both my best friend and I were in rough situations. Money was tight, life was messy, and we needed a place to live immediately. There wasn't time to be picky. We were scanning listings non-stop, calling numbers, showing up to viewings that were already half gone by the time we arrived. Eventually, we found this basement apartment not far from downtown. It was cheap. Way too cheap, honestly. $650 for a 2-bedroom in that area should have been a red flag. But desperation has a way of blinding you. The place was awful. There's no nicer way to say it. Low ceilings, old stained carpet, bad lighting, that damp underground smell that never really goes away. The windows were tiny and grimy, set high in the walls, just enough to remind you that the world was still happening above you. But it had 2 bedrooms, and the price meant we could breathe for a bit while we figured out something better. We told ourselves it was temporary, just a few months. We could handle anything for a few months. The first few days were uneventful. We unpacked what little we had, tried to make the space feel more livable, laughed about how bad it was. But almost immediately, something started to feel off, and I didn't notice it consciously at first. It started with my sleep. Within days of moving in, I began having intense nightmares, the kind that jolts you awake with your heart racing, your body tense, soaked in fear. The strange part was that I could never remember what the nightmares were actually about. I would wake up absolutely terrified, breath shallow, adrenaline surging, but my mind was blank. Just fear with no story attached to it. It happened every single night. After about a week of this, the fear started bleeding into my waking hours, especially when I was in my bedroom. My room was the larger of the two, and one entire wall backed up against a storage area that the landlord had access to from upstairs. Knowing that there was a space on the other side of that wall where someone could technically be at any time made my skin crawl. Whenever I was in that room alone, I had this overwhelming feeling that someone was about to burst through the wall and kill me. It wasn't just anxiety, it was sudden, visceral terror, like my body was reacting to something real. Eventually, it got so bad that I couldn't be in there by myself anymore. My friend's bedroom was tiny, more like a closet, so she ended up moving into my room with me. We pushed our beds together and slept in the same space like kids afraid of the dark. It helped a little, but the fear never fully went away. Around that same time, we started noticing things outside. We had a small shared backyard area that we had to use to let the dog out at night. It was poorly lit, was surrounded by the house and neighboring buildings, shadows everywhere. Every time I went out there after dark, I had this intense feeling that someone was watching me from the top floor of the house. I would look up, scanning the windows, convinced I'd see a face. Sometimes I thought I saw movement, but when I focused, there was nothing obvious. Still, the feeling never went away. When my roommate started coming out with me, she noticed it too. She didn't say anything at first, but eventually she admitted that she also felt like someone was watching us. That confirmation made everything worse. It wasn't just in my head. We also had a mutual guy friend who we spent a lot of time with. The three of us were always hanging out, and he stayed over fairly often. Having him there made the apartment feel safer. Like whatever was wrong with the place backed off a little when there was another person around. One night, we all went out together, and when we got back, he decided to head home instead of staying over. My roommate and I stayed up for a couple more hours, talking, watching TV, trying to ignore that familiar sense of unease. By around 3 in the morning, we realized we'd probably sleep in, so we decided to take the dog out one last time before bed. I put the leash on her so she wouldn't mess around or refuse to come back in. We stepped into the backyard, and almost immediately something felt wrong. The air felt heavier than usual, like it was pressing down on us. As I stood there, holding the leash, I started seeing shadows moving toward us. Not just one shadow, but multiple, shaped like people walking. They weren't solid, and they didn't make sense with the lighting, but they were there, shifting and approaching. I don't know what came over me in that moment. I didn't stop to think. I didn't ask my roommate what she saw. I just reacted. I screamed as loud as I could, telling her to get in the house. My voice didn't even sound like my own. It was pure panic. She yelled something back, confused, but she didn't hesitate. The two of us grabbed the dog and ran inside, slamming the door behind us. We were breathless, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging. As we ran down the stairs toward our apartment, we both saw them. Red eyes. They were peering in through the small, filthy basement windows. Multiple sets. Glowing, unmistakable, watching us. I completely lost it. I screamed at the top of my lungs, calling out our friend's name, even though I knew he wasn't there. It was instinct, desperation, some childish hope that someone would appear and make it stop. Then my roommate's phone rang. It was him. He said he didn't know why, but he suddenly felt like he needed to call us. That alone gave me chills. We told him what was happening, barely able to get the words out, and he immediately said he was coming over. He stayed with us almost every night for the next 2 weeks. We barely slept. When he wasn't there, we stayed awake with the lights on. We didn't go into the backyard after dark anymore. Every noise made us jump. Every shadow felt threatening. We moved out as fast as we possibly could. To this day, I don't know what those red eyes were. I don't know what those shadows were, or why the nightmares started the moment we moved in. I don't know why we both felt watched, or why the fear was so intense and constant. We always suspected the landlord or whoever lived upstairs had something to do with it, whether directly or indirectly. There was just something deeply wrong about that place. 8 years later, if I pass that house on the streetcar, I still get that same sick feeling in my stomach. My heart speeds up, my palms sweat. Whatever happened there changed the way I listen to my instincts. I don't brush off fear the same way anymore. Because sometimes fear isn't imaginary. Sometimes it's your body telling you that you're not safe, even when you don't yet understand why. This happened when I was still in high school, about 3 years ago. And even now it feels unreal when I think back on it. I still replay it in my head sometimes, wondering how close we were to something far worse happening. It's not a ghost story or anything supernatural, but the fear was so intense and so sudden that it has stayed with me in a way I can't really explain. That summer, I was visiting a close friend of mine in South Korea. She lived there, and I had come to stay with her for a few weeks during my school break. It was my first long stay in another country, and everything felt exciting and new. The streets were busy, the food was amazing, and even small things like late-night cafes and convenience stores felt like an adventure. I felt safe, mostly because I was always with her, and because Korea generally felt calm and orderly compared to where I was from. One Friday night, we decided to stay out late. We were both teenagers, and it felt thrilling to be out at night without parents checking the time or calling us to come home. We walked around for hours, talking, laughing, stopping into little shops, and just enjoying the warm summer air. At some point, we ended up sitting on a bench in a small park. It wasn't a big park, just a simple green space with a few trees, a walking path, and several benches lined up along the sides. As we were sitting there, we noticed a kid walking by holding a box of fried chicken. Fried chicken is really popular there, especially late at night, so it didn't seem strange at all. He looked young, probably around our age or maybe a little younger. He sat down a few benches away from us and started eating. We didn't pay him much attention. We were focused on our conversation and just enjoying the night. After a while, we decided it was time to leave. As we stood up and started walking toward the exit of the park, we saw the kid drop a piece of fried chicken on the ground. It was unfinished, like he had taken a bite and then just let it fall. Then he stood up and started walking in our direction. At first, we didn't think much of it. The park was small, and there were only a few paths leading out, so it made sense that he might be heading the same way. We joked quietly about how lazy he must be for not throwing his trash away. We left the park and crossed a road. As we reached the other side, I glanced back, and my stomach dropped. He was there too, when standing on the opposite side of the road. Again, that alone wasn't enough to fully alarm us. Maybe he lived nearby. Maybe he was just walking home. But then he smiled at us and waved. It wasn't a friendly wave, not the kind you give when you recognize someone. It felt wrong. I turned to my friend and asked if she knew him. She shook her head, clearly confused and uncomfortable. We both laughed it off nervously, telling ourselves he was probably just some awkward kid. Still, something about the situation made my skin crawl. We gave him a quick, awkward wave back, and then turned around and started walking faster. We went several blocks away from the park, sticking to busier streets with more lights and people around. Eventually, we ducked into a coffee shop to calm down and take a break. We told ourselves we were being paranoid. After all, following someone for a block or two doesn't necessarily mean anything. We sat down near the window, ordered drinks, and tried to relax. A few minutes later, I happened to glance outside. He was there. I watched through the cafe window as he turned a corner at the end of the street and continued walking straight toward the coffee shop. My heart started pounding. My friend noticed the look on my face and asked what was wrong. When I told her, she went pale. She scares easily, and I could see the panic setting in. She said she needed to use the bathroom, partly as an excuse to get away from the window, and partly because she was genuinely nervous. We went together. In Korea, many cafes and restaurants are connected to larger buildings, and the bathrooms aren't always inside the cafe itself. You usually have to go through a side door that leads into a hallway, then find the restroom from there. That's what this place was like. We walked through a door inside the cafe and into a quiet hallway. It was dimmer than the main seating area, and suddenly everything felt much more isolated. Inside the bathroom, I tried to calm my friend down. I told her that if the kid followed us inside the cafe, the staff would notice, that we were overthinking it. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then everything happened so fast. The lights went out. At first, I thought it was just a power issue. But before I could even process that thought, The bathroom door was kicked open with so much force that it slammed against the wall. We barely had time to react before we were shoved into one of the stalls. I remember the feeling of being pushed, of losing my balance, of the world suddenly turning into darkness and chaos. Hands grabbed my hair roughly, yanking my head back. Another hand covered my mouth so hard I could barely breathe. I felt completely frozen, like my body had shut down. I didn't scream. I couldn't. Terror wrapped around me so tightly that my voice disappeared. Something cold pressed against my throat. I didn't know what it was, but my mind immediately jumped to the worst possibilities. I could hear my friend beside me, gasping and crying out in pain. That sound is something I will never forget. In that moment, I was certain we were going to die, or that something horrible was about to happen to us. My thoughts were scattered and panicked. I remember thinking about my parents, about how unfair it was, about how we shouldn't have gone out that night. And then, or just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The pressure lifted. The hands let go. In the darkness, a voice whispered close enough that I could feel the breath near my ear. "Wrong one." Then he ran. We stayed there for what felt like forever, even though it was probably only a minute or two. The lights eventually flickered back on. We were shaking uncontrollably, clinging to each other, trying to understand what had just happened. Neither of us was seriously injured, but we were in shock. We stumbled out of the bathroom and told the cafe staff what happened. The police were called, statements were taken, but the kid was never found. Even now, years later, I still have nightmares about that night, about the smile and the wave, about the words he whispered before he ran away. Wrong one. I don't know what he meant by that. And I don't think I want to. The not knowing is what haunts me the most. It taught me how quickly a normal night can turn into something terrifying, and how danger doesn't always look obvious until it's right in front of you. If you're still here, it means these stories didn't just fade away, they stayed with you. Each one was shared to feel real, quiet, and close. Moments that could happen to anyone. Moments where something felt wrong, or nearly did. If you'd like to keep listening to stories that linger long after they're told, consider subscribing to Sleepy Shadows. There are more waiting in the dark, and not all of them disappear by morning. Good night.